Great, thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'll call to order the Electoral Area Services Committee of December 6th. I'd first like to acknowledge that we're meeting on the unceded and traditional territory of the Comox First Nation, whose ancestors have stewarded this land since time immemorial. I don't see anyone in the gallery, so we can proceed. We have a management report for receipt.
Move it.
Moved and seconded. Are there any questions or items? Director Grieve? Go ahead.
Just a comment, Madam Chair. When you look at the Electoral Area Service Committee Management Report, it kind of reads like a first-year newbie wish list that goes on for 3 pages. I'm suggesting we're going to have get serious about dropping some of those out as we go through. I know it's great to have all these plates in the air, but in reality, we've got 10 months left of our tenure, so we're going to have to bear down on a few items and let the rest flap in the wind, so to speak.
Dr. Grieve, did you have any items particularly that you think staff should?
Not at this point.
Okay.
I'm just throwing it out there.
Thanks. Director Arbor.
I don't have it before me, but I think there's 22 items on there, right? So maybe we should have a goal by the end of summer to have only leave 4 or 5 for the next board.
Pass on away.
All right, thank you. I don't see any other comments or questions. On receipt, is anyone opposed? And that is carried. We have the Advisory Planning Commission minutes for Area C, B, and the Agricultural Advisory Commission as well. Director Grieve and Director Arbor have moved and seconded. Were there any comments or questions around the minutes? Hearing and seeing none. Is anyone opposed? And that's carried. Item number 2, Electoral Area C Development Variance Permit for Glacier View Close for receipt. Moved and seconded, and over to staff.
Thank you very much, Chair and Directors. And Dylan Deason is here, planner, who will present this report and answer any of your questions.
Go ahead, Dylan. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Russell. Good morning, Madam Chair. Through the chair to the committee, a development variance permit application has been received for the property at 716 Glacier View Close on Mount Washington to increase the maximum height for a principal dwelling from 10 to 12 meters. The property is small and circular at 0.02 hectares or 200 square meters in size. It's within Mount Washington Comprehensive Development Zone's Resort Accommodation 1 sub-district, which is the only one to have a height maximum. The owners are requesting the variance in order to offset the need to raise the foundation, to build it over a rock protrusion, and to pitch the roof at an angle to handle the snow load. But they were able to reduce the height from its original design, which had a proposed height of 14 meters. The Advisory Planning Commission for Area C considered this application at their November meeting and voted to support the application, listing for reasons that the owners accommodated requested changes to the design to reduce it those 2 meters from 14 to 12, that they have consulted with the Mount Washington Strata Council and neighbors, and that the development is at least partially proposed in order to deal with snow load capacity. Staff sent notification packages in the mail to all property owners and tenants within a 50-meter radius of the subject property and received correspondence from 5 neighbors. 1 neighbor raised concerns and was not in support. They are located in half of the duplex on the far side of Glacier View Close, and 4 indicated support for the application, including the owner of 710 Glacier View Close, who is the closest and most impacted. Staff are recommending that the variance application be approved, as the additional height will not likely detract from views, it will not detract from privacy or the forming character of the existing development, and because the height of the dwelling will be built on a slope and is measured from the average natural grade, the facade of the building closest to the other dwellings will be approximately 11 meters, slightly offsetting the impact. I will note that the owners and agent representing the owners are attending the meeting virtually through Zoom. and would be available as well as I am for comments or questions.
Great, thank you. I'll welcome any comments or questions or anything to add to that presentation from the owner or the agent, if you're there.
I am here. I have no comment to add to that. That's great. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
And Tom and I are here, and Darcy, Dylan explained everything pretty well for us. And I thank you for that.
Thank you. Do directors have any questions or comments to the owner or to your staff? Director Grieve.
Thank you very much. Just that the Area C APC did look at this, and they realized that due to the fact there's so many restraints up the mountain, and not to mention, the fact that the building envelope is so short that they were in favor. In fact, I think one of the members of my APC wanted to know if they could actually join your family. Thank you.
Thanks, Director Grieve. And I too will note, I know I read the minutes from the Area C APC, and I just want to commend the owners for changing over their plan for height. It seems to at least be a bit closer to what the the limits are and the purpose of the limits. So hearing and seeing no other questions on receipt, is anyone opposed? That's carried. We have some items of correspondence to receive. Three, and then should we vary the agenda now? Okay, so we'll vary the agenda to receive because there's 2 items of correspondence in the addendum. So moved, I can second. Is anyone opposed to varying the agenda?
I'll move it.
And that's carried. So we'll have all 5 items for receipt. Moved, and I can second. Comments on the correspondence? Hearing and seeing none. Is anyone opposed to receipt? And that's carried. So I'll officially excuse the owners and the agent from the table, and we're going to move to now the recommendation. Moved.
Second.
And seconded by Director Arbor and Grieve. Comments on the recommendation to approve the DVP? Hearing and seeing none. Is anyone opposed? And that is carried. Thank you very much. And congratulations and good luck on your build.
Thank you very much, panel. I really appreciate it. And yes, you can come and visit.
Thanks. Next item on the agenda. You're welcome. Electoral Area A, Development Variance Permit for 6650 Island Highway South for receipt. Moved and seconded, and over to staff.
Thank you. And Dylan will present this report as well and answer any of your questions.
Go ahead, Dylan.
Thank you very much. Through Madam Chair to the committee. Another development variance permit application has been received by staff for the property at 6650 Island Highway South. The property is an oceanfront lot, approximately a little over 1/4 of a hectare in size. And this is the second time that the directors have been asked to consider a variance for this property. The first, approved at the May 10th, 2021 EASC meeting, allowed the owners to encroach within a setback of Craft Road, which is an unopened right-of-way owned and operated by the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure, just to the north of the subject property. After doing some preliminary work on the property, though, the owners realized that siting the dwelling within that setback would jeopardize the root systems and health of several trees that they were hoping to retain. And the owners have also now received a floodplain memo prepared by an engineer with a prescribed flood construction level that requires the house to be built up almost an additional meter in elevation. Both of these things have resulted in the owners modifying their design, and they're requesting an extra meter in height from 10 to 11 meters to offset both the smaller footprint created by relocating the dwelling out of the Craft Road setback and the required added height to meet the flood construction level. The Advisory Planning Commission for Area A convened to discuss this application but failed to meet quorum. However, an informal conversation was had about the proposal, for which Director Arbor was present and can comment on if he so wishes. Property owners and tenants within a 100-meter radius of the subject property were mailed notification packages about the variance, as well to solicit feedback. Staff received one response from a neighbor, which was in favor of the variance. Ultimately, staff recommend that the variance be approved, as the proposed development will not detract from the existing farming character. It will not create any privacy concerns, and the elevation difference in topography between houses on the ocean side of Island Highway and the non-ocean side will offset impacts to the viewscape. I believe the agent, Dave Bearden with Astor Bay Construction, and the owners are on Zoom as well.
Thanks, Dylan. So I'll invite the owner and agent if you want to add any comments to that report.
My name is Dave Pearden. Can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead, please.
Okay. I don't think I have anything to add. He seems to have covered everything, and we did a pretty good discussion about it last time, although I know there wasn't enough attendees at the meeting. And I have talked to direct neighbors on both sides, and they are absolutely fine with it. And then we're certainly not blocking any views by this extra height or in any way, taking away from anybody. That's about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Do directors have comments or questions to staff and Director Arbor?
No, I think it's good to go from my end, and I guess it's 2 times, right, that we've seen variances. So I hope there won't be a third for your own sake. For us, we don't mind if you come back, but otherwise, happy building.
Thanks, Director Arbor. So we have the report for receipt. Is there any other comments or questions? Seeing none. On receipt, is anyone opposed? And that's carried. And we have correspondence to receive. Moved and seconded. Comments, questions? Seeing none. Anyone opposed? And that's carried. And I'll excuse the owner and the agent. Thank you very much. So we have a recommendation that the board approve the DVP to increase the height from 10 to 11 meters. Moved and seconded. Comments on that? The only comment I'll make is that in light of what we've seen, in the Fraser Valley, I think raising height for flood protection is probably very, very wise. So seeing no more comments or questions, is anyone opposed? And that is carried. Thank you very much and congratulations. Happy building whenever that happens. Item number 4, Electoral Area B, development permit for 1226/1228 Don Road. Moved and seconded. And over to staff.
Thank you very much. And Jody McLean, planner, is on the line to present this report and answer any of your questions.
Great.
Well, through the CEO to the chair and directors, this is a farmland protection development permit. The owner is seeking to replace the existing secondary dwelling with a new carriage house. In your agenda package, Lisa, if you want to pull up, there's page 12 has a site plan that will illustrate this, as well as pages 7 and 8 with photos. Because this involves construction within 30 meters of an agricultural lot, this development permit is required, in which conditions involving siting, fencing, screening, and landscaping for the purposes of avoiding or mitigating future conflicts that inhibit agricultural uses of ALR land can be put in place. This development permit will remain on title so that its conditions will remain in perpetuity. The owner is proposing to utilize the same location as the existing secondary dwelling, which will result in a 19.5 meter setback between the 2-story carriage house and the ALR lot. The agricultural lot in question is 1 hectare in area and spans the first 3 lots on Don Road subdivision. And this particular lot, residential lot, is at the front end of the agricultural lot. Consequently, on the agricultural interface, the owner is proposing that a solid metal fence, 2 meters tall, will remain, along with a single row of shrubs halfway along the fence. The Ministry of Agricultural, Food and Fisheries staff who reviewed the proposal found these provisions to be suitable. The Agricultural Advisory Planning Commission reviewed and recommended extending that single row of shrubs along the entire length of the lot line shared with the agricultural lot. The draft permit in front of you accepts the owner's proposed siding, solid fence, as well as the agricultural APC's recommendation of a single row of shrubs along the entire shared line with the agricultural lot, as well as provisions for financial security. The owner, Alex Potter Kogan, is on the line also, and he can probably explain the project as well. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Jody. And does the owner have any comments or questions or anything to add to that presentation?
Yeah, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that, Jody. That was pretty good. The only thing I'd like to add is if it's possible to consider amending the $1,500 deposit. And the reason I say that is I just don't feel that these trees would survive underneath the Douglas firs. And therefore, I may never see that money back. That's all I have to add.
Would staff like to, or does anyone have a question around that? Director Grave.
Yes, just for a little context on this, there was quite a lot of discussion at the Agriculture Advisory on this. And there were some members of the advisory that thought it was a little overreaching and did recognize the fact that underneath the Douglas fir trees, it would be difficult. And my understanding is, and maybe I'll ask this through the chair, my understanding is that that this is not being required by the ALC. It's not suggested by the ALC. So there was some talk about the fact that it wasn't directly related to agriculture, and perhaps the advisory was being a little overreaching on this. So I would support not having to plant that extra hedging, or if so, then waive the $1,500 deposit on it, because I have to agree that my first feeling was much the same, that they're not going to survive. Thank you.
Would staff like to comment on that around the deposit, or, you know, if that can be altered at this point?
Yeah, the purpose of the deposit is to ensure the plantings and the conditions of the permit are fulfilled. It's returned upon confirmation that the plantings are completed and that there's been no damage to the environment or hazardous conditions created. And it can be reduced upon a submission of a financial quote from a landscaper confirming there's a lower cost than the $1,500. It's only meant to cover whatever is remaining of the project.
Okay, thanks for your comment. Any other questions from the directors? Okay, I on receipt then of both the staff report and the owner's comments. Is anyone opposed? And that is carried. And I'll excuse the owner from the table. We do have a recommendation. Moved by Director Arbor. Second by, I will second it just to get it on the table. And it looks like Director Grief has a comment.
As I alluded to previously, I think there are some members of the Agriculture Advisory that do believe that they're getting a little off the beam as to their focus on agriculture on this, and it really was something superfluous to the integral responsibility that they have to ensure that, you know, that agricultural values are respected. It was getting into hedging and things like that. There was, I know that it did pass, but just to let you know, there was a minority opinion that thought this was a little bit out there. So I'm I would like to not have to, not to support that piece of it, the vegetative buffer piece along the northern lot line. I don't see it really has an impact on the neighbor, on their agricultural activity, which I understand is fairly minimal at best. Thank you.
Madam Chair, if I could just ask Jody. Jody, could you confirm that these are conditions not developed by the committee themselves, but are in fact enshrined within the development permit that has been adopted by bylaw by the board? So they're not, it's not that they are discretionary matters, it's the terms of the development permit that set this rather than the committee.
Yeah, that's right. The development permit guidelines direct that we take a look at this agriculture interface, and given the conditions that are present and what's proposed, they formulate these recommendations.
Okay, so it sounds like they're necessary for the DVP. Okay, I hope that was a clarification that helps. Are there any other comments about the recommendation? Hearing and seeing none, is there anyone opposed to Director Grieve? Okay, and that carries. Thank you very much. And thank you to the owner and happy building.
Yeah,
Item
thank you
number-
very much.
Item number 5 then. The Denman Island Water Local Service Area 2202 Water Services Agreement for receipt. And over to staff.
Thank you, Chair and Directors. And Chris LaRose is on the line, and he will present this report and answer any of your questions.
Thanks and welcome, Chris.
Good morning, and through the chair. So this is the latest revision to the water supply agreement for the Denman Island Water Local Service Area with the Graham Lake Improvement District. There is some potential that this may be the last such revision brought forward for the water supply agreement, as we are actively exploring the concept of conversion of the Graham Lake Improvement District over the coming year. So pending the news of the grant application for the potential water treatment project for this system. Otherwise, the revisions to this water supply agreement are very minor and grammatical in nature, and there's no substantial change from the previous year. So yeah, I'm happy to speak to any questions about the water supply agreement or the ongoing process with the Graham Lake Improvement District.
Great, thanks, Chris. I don't see any other questions here. So on receipt of that report, is anyone opposed? And that's carried, and we have a recommendation. Moved and seconded. Comments, questions? Hearing and seeing none, is anyone opposed? And that's carried. Great, moving along, update on the grant application strategy for extension of sewer services south for receipt. Moved and seconded and over to staff.
Thank you very much. And Mark Rutten, General Manager of Engineering Services, is here to present this report. Just a verbal one for your information and answer any of your questions.
Thanks very much and welcome, Mark. And I think you'll just have to press, yeah.
Thank you. Through the CEO and through the chair, just bear with me for 1 minute. I shouldn't have closed this thing. Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. Derry Monteith would normally be presenting this report, but she's struggling with power outage issues and snow issues and cell phone signal issues today, so she's not able to make it.
Commiserations.
And Vince Van Togeren, our engineering analyst, is here to help support me with any questions that you might have. So this report provides an update on the grant application strategy currently underway for the Sewer Extension South project. And since our last update in November, we've been working to progress project planning in order to support a funding application to the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Fund or program. The proposal will need to address feedback from the Ministry of Municipal Affairs on project scope and risks, maximizing benefits to local residents and ensuring a per property cost that remains reasonable. This work is still ongoing. However, progress has been made on several items. including last week, a virtual open house with 83 attendees and an in-person open house in Union Bay with 75 attendees, with positive response from the community. The results of these events, including questions and answers, have been posted to the project webpage. And it was clear from the feedback received that from these events, that this is an important project for local residents. Many detailed questions were asked and will need to be addressed in future engagement. Project engineering and cost estimates are in process of being updated by engineering consultants. And once complete, this work will be used to inform the phase 1 project scope for the funding application. Multiple meetings with staff from relevant provincial agencies have also taken place to build support for the project. We've met with Island Health, Ministry of Environment and Climate Change Strategy, and Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Fisheries. Also, the development of a public engagement plan and elector assent strategy is underway, as are discussions with Union Bay Estates and Comox First Nation, key partners in this project. It is expected that initial project development work will be ready to present to EASC at its January meeting in 2022 in advance of a funding application deadline of January 26th. At that time, staff expect to bring forward a report for the committee's consideration with more detailed information on project scope, costs, impacted communities, assent process options and timing, and a public engagement strategy. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Sounds like engineering staff are going to be busy over the holidays.
Yeah.
Okay, does any of the directors have any comments or questions? Director Grieve?
Yes, thank you very much through the chair and CAO to staff. So when you talk about massaging the grant application process, that's my first question. What does that really entail? I mean, is there some criteria out there that this has to conform to? Because when you look at the environmental impact that the lack of this project would create, you know, you'd think that the senior government would be definitely lining up in support of it. So I'm just wondering, is that part of the pitch?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very important part of it. So I would say this project is very attractive to the funders. It does provide a lot of key benefits that meet their criteria. Environmental benefit, shellfish growing area, failing septic systems. But it does struggle when compared against other projects in terms of the number of residents that it benefits compared to the cost per resident. So it's really just looking at those things and trying to develop a proposal that meets as many of the requirements as possible and is just more convincing than last time.
Okay, and I suppose that we're looking at some kind of a public assent process on this. Do we have any idea what that's going to look like at this point? Would it be a liquid waste management plan, or would it be something a little more direct, like a referendum or petition?
Yeah, thank you. So we are going to bring some options and a recommendation forward in the next report. And we'll be discussing the pros and cons of a few different approaches, including liquid waste management planning and a referendum. So that'll be expected in January as part of that report.
And just one more, if I may. And I guess I could ask this for Daniel Arbor when he gives his verbal report on this. But for the most part, are the residents, aware that their property values have more than doubled since the last time we went down this road, and construction costs are up 27%? So I mean, do they have maybe unrealistic expectations of what their portion will cost in the end of it?
I think we had some really good feedback at the two public events that we had last week. there's a lot of support in the community for this project. I think people understand that this is the best long-term solution, that the status quo is not acceptable, and they understand that it can't continue the way it is. But there still is an affordability threshold, for the community. So some people, in sort of one-on-one conversations express what they thought that was. But overall, I would say there's a high level of support and a good understanding in the community that this is a good option moving forward.
So realistic. They're realistic about the proposal. Okay. Well, I wish you all the best of luck. Thank you.
Thanks, Director Grieve. Any other comments? Okay, hearing and seeing none. Is anyone opposed to receipt? And that's carried. Thanks, Mark. Item number 7, the Hornby Water Stewardship Fund request follow-up for receipt. Moved, and I can second, and over to staff.
Thank you very much. And Vince Van Tongeren is here to present this report and answer any of your questions. Again, this is just for information at this time.
Thanks and welcome, Vince.
Okay, thank you, Russell. Good morning, directors. Yeah, as mentioned, this report does present some follow-up information regarding Hornby Water Stewardship's September delegation to this committee, where consideration of funding support was requested for an incentive program for water quality and quantity equipment, such as rainwater storage or conversion of pit toilets to composting toilets. Staff have looked into the request in relation to potential CVRD funding sources that could support this type of incentive program. The Rural Community Grants Program was investigated as a potential funding source. However, as the program proposed by Hornby Water Stewardship would fund equipment being installed on private property, this would not be an applicable funding source. The rainwater collection program proposed by Hornby Water Stewardship is similar to one that's offered by the Regional District of Nanaimo under their Drinking Water and Watershed Protection Program. The study has recently been initiated to investigate options for similar service delivery by the Comox Valley Regional District. And this work will be presented to this committee next spring. Dependent upon the outcome of this process, there could be options in the future to fund incentives such as those proposed by Hornby Water Stewardship. In regards to protection of groundwater quality and quantity, under the current septic education program, a rebate program is proposed for 2023, and this would provide septic upgrade incentives such as risers, effluent filters, or distribution boxes. Upgrades such as this help facilitate improved septic performance and maintenance, therefore having a positive impact on groundwater quality. And we are also working with the Hornby Residents Association on a potential program to support the continued use of composting toilets on Hornby. The objectives of this program would also help protect groundwater quality, while also helping reduce demand on groundwater quantity by reducing indoor water use. With that, be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. And we have Director Arthur.
Yeah, thanks for the report. There's a little bit to unpack, I guess, because I guess there are different threads to the main problematics we're trying to address. One is future water shortage, and the other is kind of groundwater quality protection. And it looks like we have nascent or seeds of solutions, as you described, with various initiatives. I do have a couple of comments. One is, I guess we'll see what happens with the watershed initiative or something like that. We've discussed that the last couple of months at an elected officials forum and in other settings as well. It's so early to say how this will evolve or whether it will evolve even. So in a place like Hornby that is facing significant pressure already through droughts and the historical densities and the impact on the water quality, as we saw in the septic regulation report, I wouldn't want to hang our hopes on a regional solution because that might be quite a ways down the road. So I still like the idea, a bit like what we're doing with the composting toilet, to further explore this. And there's some good points in there. We don't have a water service to ground this into. The rural grant and aid is interesting because is this a board policy that we won't fund things that go in private? Is this a policy that just applies to the grant and aid? Because, for example, we give grants for heat pumps through another service, and now we're talking about in 2023 to give to help support boxes and such things for septic systems. So I'm just wondering whether there's something, the way that the bylaw of the rural grant is written, that we can do that while we can do it in other services or through other means and methods. So that'd be one question, and I may have other comments after.
Vince, do you know enough about the heat pump program to comment on that, or should I ask Alana Malawi if you could help with that?
Well, I believe the heat pump program is, some of that is funded through funding through the province. Is that correct, Alana?
Yeah, we'll just ask Alana to explain that program and what the differences may be. Thank you.
And if I may, CEO, to comment on the proposed 2023 septic things that we might support people with.
Thanks. Welcome, Alana. Sorry.
Thank you. Through Madam Chair to the directors. The rebates that we offer for the heat pump exchange are rebates. It's not through a formal grant. We do receive grants on our wood stove exchange, but the rebate money we used for the heat pumps was through an initiative of Clean BC. So I would suggest slightly different, but certainly there is room within some of the funding streams that we're seeing emerge from the province to think about how we put money back into the hands of property owners for these various upgrades that will make them more climate or energy resilient. So no tax requisition on those.
And then Vince, can you comment on the subject that are proposed?
Sure. So yeah, the septic rebates proposed would be under the liquid waste planning service. So that would be function 340. And under that function, there isn't a policy I'm aware of that would prevent us from proceeding with that type of rebate program.
Director Arbor?
I didn't catch that sentence, but my question was going to be, yeah, so what would be, so it's function 340, the liquid waste management plan, and we could do homeowners grants through that, but not through the rural grant and aid. So I'm just wondering why we have inconsistency between services on that. Because it sounds like those that would come from taxpayers, right, in 340, or would it come from the province or somewhere else and we would capture it there?
Well, yeah, further to that, one means we are exploring in regards to support the proposed incentive program under 340 is we've approached one of the industry associations, the West Coast On-Site Wastewater Management Association of BC. We've initiated a dialogue with them for seeking funding support, and that type of funding support would support an incentive program. This idea is one that again comes from the regional district of Nanaimo. They've had a similar incentive program in the past, and that was funded. Whether I can't say whether it was fully funded, but definitely partially funded through funding provided from the industry association.
Good. So I may ask at the next meeting that staff, after we receive this is just for receipt. Yeah, it's just for receipt for a requested action that staff either sends us via email or at the next meeting, bring back the policy for the rural grants. Because I mean, to me, this is a possible, I'm not saying that we would fund it necessarily, but this is a possible project that if you think about the protection of groundwater and all that, there's definitely a public good notion in underlying it. And I mean, we do all kinds of grants to all kinds of organizations, and many of them may engage directly with homeowners. The food hub is obviously going to have private benefits to people. So I can think just of multiple places where we invest dollars with either private businesses or individuals. And I just like to have the clarity to inform decision in the future as to what the rationale would be for treating one service a certain way and others a different way. And overall, I think the report is fine. The Water Stewardship is really doing a great job on ORB, trying to to wrap their heads around something, and I'm thankful that staff is working with them to try to see what's going to have an impact long term. I still believe that septic regulation, I don't know how we're going to bite into it at some point for the rural areas, but I guess that's not a matter for today. That'll be a matter for the future. But there's still that's still a key one when it comes to the water quality component. Thank you.
Thanks, Director Arbor. I would support that motion as well. I did have a question myself, or maybe more of a comment. I'm wondering if there was a need that Hornby Water Stewardship, if they saw a need for more education and possibly a demonstration site. And if so, would something like that qualify for grant and aid if it was more like a general education?
If an independent society or organization or association is undertaking works like that for the good of the community, by all means, they have the opportunity of applying for grants and aid.
Okay, great, thanks. I wonder if that could be communicated back to them, that maybe not individual homeowner grants yet, but for now, education demonstration. Yeah. Director Arbor?
I think you just did communicate to them.
Well, I don't assume everybody's watching YouTube, so it's yeah. Great. Any other comments or questions? Hearing and seeing none on receipt. Is anyone opposed? And that's carried. Thanks.
And Madam Chair, I'm hearing the directors contemplating a resolution to direct staff to come back with a report that just explains in a little bit more detail the application of rebates, grants and aids, and how they apply to individual landowners or not.
Yes, so that's a requested action moved by Director Arbor, and I'll accept. Okay, Director Graves seconds. Any other comments on that directed action? Okay, hearing and seeing none. Anyone opposed? And that is carried. And Lisa, did you get the comment or the wording? Okay, thanks. Item number 8. Safe Restart Grant Program funding, second installment allocations for receipt. And over to staff.
Thank you very much, Chair and Directors, and Kevin DeVell, Acting CFO, is here to present this report and answer any questions.
Great, thanks. Welcome, Kevin.
Thank you very much, Russell. Through the chair to the directors, good morning. So I'll just provide a bit of a summary as to the update to this particular report, and then myself and General Manager Community Services, Doug DeMarzo, will be available to answer any questions. So as directors may recall, at the November 8th EASC meeting, we did staff brought a report forward with respect to potential allocations of the second installment of BC Safe Restart funding to the tune of $402,000. And at that time, after that deliberation, directors did request staff to take this back and give it a little bit more of a rethink and to bring back some modified recommendations. So that's what's in front of you today. So as the report indicates, in addition to the $40,000 that was already previously allocated to a number of community halls to support outdoor washroom development, we've put forward some further recommendations. Firstly, to support a number of our community halls in the area, of which we now help support approximately a dozen throughout the region. 2 of those facilities have some very specific needs or requests. First being the Fenny Bay Community Hall with helping to address some kitchen mold remediation work. And secondly, the Falden Alders Hall to assist with improvements to ventilation and window installation as part of a risk mitigation coming out of COVID-19. Of course, as we've spoken to previously, a number of these community halls continue to deal with coming out of revenue losses associated with the pandemic, and are also as part of their kind of restart and recovery strategies, looking to make improvements to their aging facilities with respect to things like ventilation and heating improvements. And of course, with the pending start of the current new programs that we've developed with respect to supporting our community halls, we're also starting to look ahead as these facilities continue to recover with respect to current or future asset management requirements for each of these aging community halls. We've also taken a look at what was originally proposed with respect to the food security aspect of this. So we have scaled that back at the director's request. And of course, we would continue to work with the Comox Valley Community Foundation if the director supported that avenue to ensure that any criteria developed to support agencies in the community would be focused on exactly that restart and recovery aspect rather than what the previous dollars were for, which was to deal with the pandemic itself as it was currently underway. We have also proposed some additional funding to support the neighborhood emergency preparedness program as the directors had requested to help continue to support that work being undertaken through the Comox Valley Emergency Program. One new item that we have also added to this list is to help support our emergency program with some needed technological and internet connectivity improvements, i.e. the radio tower that is currently going to be shifted over from their Moray site to this particular facility, and to assist some of the growing costs with respect to ensuring that can be adequately put in place, and obviously help support emergency preparedness and communication, which is certainly one of the key criteria with respect to this funding. And then lastly, we've left the issue with respect to the community self-service tools on there. That was something that was unanimously supported by directors at that November meeting. So we certainly continue to intend to move forward with that work as well. And just as a reminder, we are required to have these dollars allocated by the end of December. We don't have to have them actually spent, but certainly allocated. And so staff are potentially looking with leave from the directors today, bringing this forward to the December 21st board meeting for the board's consideration. And at that point, I'll leave it for any questions.
Great. And thank you for underlining the fact that we really need to make a decision on this today. So over to Director Arbor.
I would move to, just kidding.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, I felt a little bad last month that we held it back as directors for this piece, but seeing what's come back, I'm really happy with it. So that's great. I last week I was invited, so I'll just speak on one item. And last week I was invited for a little meeting and tour with the Fanny Bay Association, Community Association, and it was really informative actually to both see the work that they do and also what they're facing right now. And it's the classic thing that when we start talking about supporting community halls more formally rather than through rural grants, that all of us, I think staff and board, we're talking about, which is the old halls. And I think they had some, this particular stage where they're at Fanny Bay, it just started with a floor replacement, and then we go down the rabbit hole, right? So you open a while, you found mold, and you start looking down below into the structure. So their comment was, first of all, that they were very pleased with their relationship, I think, with the CVRD, and both in regards to this new function, and also through the COVID, because we did have the COVID groups with the hall supporting each other. So there was really positive feedback. The other is we got into a conversation around asset management, and it's clear that with where they're at, if some of those funds, I think what they were saying is, yes, we want to do more remediation, but there's probably a need for an assessment, right? Rather than to just kind of uncover what's going on. So I encourage them to talk to staff about that component and what should be prioritized short term. But I'm very supportive of us allocating a fair chunk to that project. I think in some of the other halls, we have a better handle, but what I saw was this was a big awakening and difficult on volunteer boards too, right? When you have gone out to the community and fundraise a bunch of money for a floor replacement, and then all of a sudden that opens the door. So so I appreciate that they were highlighted in the report, and I'm really pleased that they'll be supported. And even if it's a few $10,000 that go towards the Fanny Bay Hall, I'm totally fine with it. I mean, I guess you guys will see what needs to happen, but thank you for that. And then the emergency thing sounds great. And food security, thank you for capturing our comments. I saw, almost felt like I was anti-food security after my comments last month, but that was not the intent, right? It's just to try to figure out our role in this. So thanks so much for all this good work, and I certainly won't hold it back.
Thanks, Director Arbor. Director Grieve, I know you want to.
Just quickly, thanks to Kevin and the crew for hearing us on this. Certainly, it reminds me of a loaves and fishes kind of a scenario. I mean, it's not a lot of money when you divvy it all up. It's more like life support for some of these community halls on that side. But yeah, I think that you know, we're just grateful that the province as well kind of reviewed the allotment that they put aside for electoral areas. You know, compared to municipalities, quite often, you know, they forget about this child they created. Thank you.
Thanks, Director Grieve. Kevin, I had a couple of questions. The allotment that's going to go to the rural halls, will that impact the tax requisition at all? Or is this going to be kept separately? Or
So through the chair to the director. So at this point, we would anticipate that if this was supported, what we would do is we would build this into the upcoming financial plan. This would be seen as a contribution from these particular allotments. It wouldn't impact the requisition as we're currently laying it out per se, because this would be dollars that would fall outside of that. Of course, you know, we're just in the kind of inaugural stages of building some of those community hall services. And so, you know, certainly as we move forward towards potential long-term funding agreements, really trying to get a handle on, you know, what the asset management needs would come back, that would obviously be reflected in future financial plan submissions.
okay, thank you. And, you know, I hear Director Arbor's comments about, you know, many of these halls just at the very nascent level of asset management. So I can see that dollars will be needed and quite large dollars in the future. My only one comment was when these dollars are put into that function, will there be a stipulation of how they're to be used? Like similar to the conversation we had around food security, will the halls be, you know, required to do like an upgrade, like a more of a capital cost? Or I just want to make sure that, again, money is spent in a way that I think the directors are looking at.
Through the chair again to the director. So yeah, certainly our intent is to create reserves within certainly the new services that you know, just currently we're struck. And then, you know, we would put those into an appropriate likely capital works reserve. So they would be dedicated for those kind of capital purposes. But we would certainly keep the director's desires in mind when kind of going forward with those proposals.
Director Arbor, you have another question?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. You triggered a little more comments for me on this topic. Part of the conversation too, as we know, is you know, for many of those halls, it was the first time for some of them. I shouldn't say for many, but for some of them, it was the first time that they kind of moved from a 1-year planning horizon to a 5-year financial plan, because we requested that as part of. So, and that in itself is a different way to look at it, but. Maybe what I'm thinking is maybe that can be sort of our legacy for the next term as we wrap up this one, is if we can get a few of those assessments done, you know, that then will inform the kind of longer term financial requirements for the buildings and what is local government willing to support versus what will be expected that they go and fundraise and get through other avenues. If by this time next year, if by next October, or in light of the 2023 budget, that we can actually have a handle with them on the state of the assets and the requirements forward, I think that would be a really useful piece for all the communities. And again, the one thing I reiterated and that I've heard from Dr. Amir and Dr. Grieve too is those halls are really the heart of the rural communities. And I think that it's really easy, I think, for us to support that and for local government to support all those associations that are doing the good work in the end.
Great. Thanks, Director Arbor. Director Grieve.
Yeah, and further to that as well, I know when I was on FCM talking to some of the wardens from New Brunswick, which are sort of our equivalents and whatever, that they get quite a lot of federal funding for their hauls. So maybe we have to keep our ear to the ground and submit some grant funding and don't miss those opportunities that are available on the East Coast.
Thanks, Director Grieve. I don't see any other comments or questions lights up, so I'm gonna ask the vote on receipt. Anyone opposed? And that's carried, and we have a recommendation. Moved. And I can second that the EASC recommends to the Comox Valley Regional District Board that the 402,000 additional BC Safe Restart grant funding be allocated to support the initiatives as presented. Other comments? Hearing and seeing none. Actually, I should be asking in favor since we're all here. All those in favor? Anyone opposed? And that's carried. Thanks. Item number 9, proposed amendments to the electoral areas parks regulations, municipal ticket information bylaw, and the parkland development cost charge bylaw for receipt. Moved and seconded, and over to staff.
Thank you very much, Chair and Directors. And Brian Allert, Parks Technician, is here to present the report with what he is hoping is a record for the number of recommendations.
Yeah.
So he'll answer any of your questions.
Thanks, Brian. Welcome. And you just have to press the button.
Thank you, Russell. Through Madam Chair to the directors. So, but once a year, we go through our parks bylaw and do a review, and the review this year has resulted in the 9 recommendations that you have before you this morning. Now, the first 6 of those are basically adding parks that we've acquired in the last likely 18 to 24 months. And we're looking at also naming those parks as we bring them into the bylaw. A majority of those are in electoral area A, and then we have the one in area C. Now, recommendation number 7 is where we look at adding some new regulations to the bylaw with issues that have come up in the park over the last year. One of those being that there's a lot more garbage we're seeing in our garbage cans. Some of that is household garbage that people are looking for a spot to get rid of, and they find a can in a park and they're filling those up with household items. So we're trying to discourage that, contacting people whenever we find an address in that garbage and letting them know that's not really something we'd like to see them do in future. And we're proposing that we make it a regulation under our parks bylaw and under ticketing bylaw that would allow us to follow up on such use of the garbage cans. Also had a bit of an issue with this feeding of wildlife, in part that it attracts rats to the parks. So again, just having a regulation in the bylaw would allow us to take further action if necessary. And the other item there is once in a while in our spots that are deckled for people with disabilities, we'll have people pull in there in parks, especially summertime when the park's really busy and people want to get down to the river for a swim or something. So again, we're just introducing a regulation that would allow us to take action as necessary if we're having problems with that occurring in the parks. Recommendation number 8, this is looking at adding those new regulations in the ticketing bylaws, so you'd be able to follow up with a ticket if necessary. And then number 9 deals with our development cost charges bylaw. There's been a bit of an issue around how to interpret the tourist accommodation part. Right now it says per room. So if you have like a condo type development, you end up with rooms in addition to just bedrooms. But I think when we go back and look at the initial report for the development cost charge bylaw, we're targeting bedrooms, not each room in the development. So we just want to clarify that. So those are the main highlights for those 9 recommendations that we're presenting this morning. There are a couple of corrections to be made in recommendation number 1, where it refers to McLeod Road. That should actually be 3rd Street there in the first line. And then in recommendation number 4, where it says, and further that, it should be park rather than trail. So there's a couple of corrections that we caught this morning.
Great, thank you. Do the directors have any comments or questions? It's a pretty thorough report. Oh, sorry, Director Barber.
No, I just want to confirm that all these seem quite sensible to me. So I'm not going to dig into any of them. So see you like me.
Thank you. So here, I'm not seeing any other questions. So on receipt, anyone opposed? And that's carried. And we have a number of recommendations. Recommendation 1 has been moved and seconded.
With the correction that Third Street rather than McLeod Road. in your
Sure,
resolution.
as amended, sorry. With the replacement of Third Street instead of McLeod. Comments? Hearing and seeing none. All those in favor? Any opposed? And that's carried. Recommendation 2 has been moved and seconded regarding the construction of the Kirk Road stairs. Any comments? All of those in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Recommendation 3. Moved and seconded at recommendation 3 on the statutory right of way on Denman Island. Not seeing any lights. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried.
I'll move forward.
Recommendation 4 is moved by Director Grieve, and I can second that. And this is okay, according to the rule of the Grieve family, around the 0.62 hectares of Piercy Road allowance. And all of those in favor? Oh, sorry, Director Arbor, thanks for the comment.
Do you have something first? I did have a question. I'm going back to my Saturday mind. Just checking for all these parks and realizing that we did the Smart opening a couple of weeks ago. Have we had consultation with Comox First Nation on any of those parks for their names and to see if they had any interest? And I'm asking that now because Piercy Park came up, and I wouldn't ask it for a connector trail or things like that, but for something a little bit more meaningful. I'm just wondering if we had that check with Comox, if they had that interest.
To my knowledge, no. We have not.
Oh, go ahead, Mark.
Mark might have something more. Mark Harrison.
Yeah, through the chair, if I would just like to comment that we did actually reach out to the land manager at the time when we were looking at naming Piercy Park, and at that time there was no concerns.
Okay. No concerns. Yeah. Thanks for clarifying, Mark. So glad the staff were on that and already checked. Okay. Any other comments on item number 4, recommendation 4? Okay, hearing and seeing none. All of those in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Recommendation 5, moved and seconded. This is regarding the construction trail on Hornby with the Gull Road allowance. Comments? All those in favor? Opposed? And that is carried. Recommendation 6. Moved and seconded. 22 hectares of land purchased in 2019 with the Comox Valley Land Trust on Lake Trail Road. And this was the renaming as well of the Calmote conservation area, allowing equestrian use of trails, requiring leashing of pets. Comments? Anyone opposed? And that's carried. Recommendation 7. Moved and seconded by Grieve and Arbor. This is bylaw 103 pertaining to those items that Brian was just speaking of. Any comments? Okay, all those in favor? Opposed? And that is carried. Recommendation 8, moved and seconded around ticketing of those 3 items. Director Grieve.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just wondering how prescriptive this is. When you talk about feeding wildlife, does that mean you can't feed the birds?
Through the
I mean, I
chair
can
to the
see
committee.
you don't feed the bears, okay? But you maybe throw something at the birds, you know, here's a breadcrumb. Is that against the law?
So the way the bylaw is proposed in the report, it would apply to feeding of birds, and it actually has been a problem where people that have been feeding the birds, that the rats are being attracted to the trails in the parks just because of the seed ends up on the ground. And
So you can't feed the rats. Okay, goodbye.
the rats generate the complaints, not the feeding of the birds, but the rats are the result because of it.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. It is one of those things, unfortunately, the secondary issue around rats. All of those in favor? Anyone opposed? And that is carried. And finally, recommendation number 9. Moved and seconded. And this is regarding the DCC and the correction around brooms that Brian was alluding to. Comments? Seeing none. All those in favor? And opposed? And that's carried. Great, thank you. Are folks okay to keep going? Do you want a break? Keep going, okay. Item number 10, fire protection service bylaw updates for receipt. Moved and seconded and over to staff.
Thank you very much, Chair and Directors, and Bruce Green is on the line to present this report and answer any of your questions.
Thank you. Over to Bruce.
Thank you, Russell. Through the CEO, through Madam Chair. This one, as you're aware, Union Bay Fire Department has come under the auspices of the Comox Regional District last year, and currently they do not have any regulations to regulate lighting and control of fires. And as well, Oyster River Fire Rescue has now taken on, or will be taking on, the Greater River Fire Protection Area January 1st, and is currently looking after the Mount Washington Fire Protection Area, which neither of them have bylaws to regulate the lighting of fires. The idea of recommendation number 1 is to create a bylaw similar to all the ones that all the other fire departments for the Comox Valley regions have. So there's some continuity of service, and it also gives Union Bay the authority to say when and where people are allowed to light fires. So it's a good fire safety measure. The other one for Oyster River Fire, we have a bylaw 357, which does regulate fires for continuity of service and clarity of service for us with the two other fire protection areas that we're protecting. We would like to have that added to that, as well as bylaw 293, which gives us the authority to enter properties and do a firefighter and purpose protections. We would like those added to the, Merville and Mount Washington added to those ones. And with those regulations comes 3 other regulations that we'll have to adapt to for us to do ticketing and indemnification. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks for that, Bruce. Any questions or comments from the directors? I don't see any, so thank you for that presentation. On receipt, all in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Recommendation 1, moved and seconded. Comments? Okay, all those in favor? Any opposed? And that is carried. 2 has been moved and seconded. Comments? All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried unanimously. And recommendation 3. Moved and seconded. Comments, questions? All those in favor? Opposed? And that's unanimously carried. Thanks, Bruce.
Thank you.
Item number 11, Coastal Flood Adaptation Project. It's a verbal report for receipt. Moved and seconded. And over to staff.
Thank you very much. And Alana Mullally is here to introduce this topic, and the staff will be available to answer any of your questions following a summary.
Great, thanks. Welcome, Alana.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair. So as you know, this has been a multi-year project for us, and in the spring, we wrapped up the phase 1, which was the mapping of the entire coastline. All of that data is available now for public consumption for both lay users and technical users. For lay users, we've developed a web app on our website whereby anyone can enter in an address in the electoral areas and see the modeling that has been done. So see the flood level, essentially where the water will go at the year 2100. Anyone can also access all of the technical data that we've compiled, showing the range of the scenarios for the entire coast. We've shared the full package with our member municipalities, the Islands Trust, Comox First Nation, and the provincial and federal governments. So we are now nearing completion of phase 2, which has been the preparation of a coastal flood adaptation strategy, which includes a risk assessment. This work will be completed in the form of a final report by the end of this month, December, and we'll be bringing forward the strategy to this committee early in the new year. This has essentially been the so what part of the project. Now that we have all of our mapping and our flood scenario modeling, essentially knowing where the water will go, how deep it will be, and how long it will stay there, we are now well positioned to bring forward evidence-based recommendations to you for decision making. Central to this work in phase 2 has been a risk assessment. So we opted to go with a risk-based approach to coastal flooding in order to make really informed decisions about adaptation options. As you've probably all heard Ebwater, our consultants, speak, something isn't really at risk if we don't care about it. So the level of engagement that we have undertaken in phase 2 was primarily at the inform and consult levels of the IIP2 spectrum. And our engagement has been targeted and very deliberate. So our objectives included increasing awareness and education among CBRD staff, stakeholders, our partners, and the community to enhance that coastal adaptation and flood risk understanding and capacity, to strengthen our relationship with our external stakeholders. And as you can imagine, these relationships are going to be absolutely critical to our ability as a community to adapt within a very complex and multi-jurisdiction environment. And lastly, we aim to inform the risk assessment and priority setting process that was undertaken by our consultants. So as stated, this was very targeted engagement in order for our consultants to develop and test information and materials that would effectively translate all of this very technical work about coastal flood hazard into some decision-making support tools for us to use going forward. In respect to our broad public engagement, last week on November 30th, we hosted an introductory information session for the public. It was very well attended and great questions, showing that people are aware, they are engaged, and they are seeking tools to enhance their own resilience. And also quite interested to know what we are doing as local government to respond and adapt. So this recording has now been posted to our webpage. We're early days in terms of talking to the broad public. The goal really was just to introduce the community to the data, to the coastal flood risk, the concept of coastal flood risk, and then to start to discuss the concept of adaptation, what it looks like, what it means, and how it can be different and nuanced depending on the risk and depending on the area of the coast that we're speaking of. Essentially, as Tamsin has stated a number of times, really understanding what we perceive to be in the way of flood hazard, of flood risk, sorry. So we'll be coming back to you, as I said, early in the new year. You'll receive a presentation, excuse me, from Ebwater on the final report. And at the staff level, we're now looking at our phase 3 options, including available grant opportunities to support future phases of the work, including more community-based engagement on adaptation options, risk tolerance, or enhance our understanding of risk tolerance in our community, and also starting to talk about some adaptation action sequencing. So what are we going to do, where, and when? Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lana. Director Arver.
Yeah, thanks. All super good work. And yeah, I guess it's a week or two ago, I was really pleased. I went to have my cup of tea in the morning and I refreshed the browser and there was all the data. There might be a little bit of polishing to do, just a little bit on the data. I'll send you an example from across my place where I guess the way it's compiled is you have data units, if you will, right? Where let's say a 200-meter chunk. I don't know how big it is, but it'll show what the flood potential is, and then it changes over. And in front of my place, there was it's quite dramatic, the change, even though it's the same piece of property. So I'll send that, because it's not a big deal at the macro level, but at the micro level, you'll see what I mean. In terms of future research, I think we mentioned that last year when we talked about this project, which is, as you mentioned, this project did address the height, but I don't believe so much the erosion potential of the underlying, right? So if I look at, again, using the example in front of our place, it's a cliff, right? Sedimentary cliff. That looks quite a bit different than if it was loose gravel in the case of a recurring event. So maybe you'll address if it was modeled in at all. Super useful. I was so pleased to see this, and I like your words. It's the start of a conversation. I think the adaptation, a lot of people shift their minds to that, but I think we still have, my sense is in the next number of years, we'll still have the opportunity to kind of refine the modeling, perhaps, because that might better inform to kind of whether neighborhood associations or local government are going to take on those projects that may need to happen. And I was in the same trip that I went to the community hall, I went to the Fanny Bay Inn after for a drink. And we talked about this project with the constituent I was with. And I can tell you that the word is spreading in the community, obviously around Ships Point. We were talking about the potential for starting a rowboat business to kind of connect Ships Point to the rest of Vancouver Island. So there's and it's good to stay lighthearted, I think, in a way when we have those conversations, because they're very serious long term, but at the same time bringing the public into the understanding around modeling. I think a lot of people that may not believe so much in climate change, they don't have that scientific basis or that understanding of study limitations or modeling limitations and all those things. And I think the more we explain that, the better it is. So people know we're neither kind of inventing things, but we're also not saying this is precisely what's going to happen at your house, right? And so awesome. And awesome that you got it done before the regional growth strategy review. I think this work is going to be foundational to regional growth strategy review next year. So all around, I'm excited. Thank you.
Thanks, Director Harbour. Director Grieve?
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair. And congratulations on some great work here. My understanding is that we're kind of on the leading edge of all of this stuff. And I'm, just wondering if there's possibly some kind of a UBCM or some kind of a program we can enter this into, and so we can get a diploma to hang on Atlanta's wall for the great work. Because I know when we started this, the very first one we did was at the fire hall in Union or in Oyster River, and there was quite a lot of people that were quite hostile to this, because this is going to put my insurance up and how dare you do all that. But then we kind of try to explain to them that we have the duty to warn. I mean, that's part of our responsibility. And I think they had the either you're a lemur looking out, for threats, or you're an ostrich with your head stuck in the sand. Which one do you want to be? So I think we're definitely lemurs now. But my question is, are we done, or where do we go from here? What's the next step? Thank you.
Thanks, Director Grieve. Over to Alana.
Through Madam Chair, you're right, this is a beginning. And so I would say that there are a couple of things that we want to think about. One would be our own internal responses in terms of using this information when we're bringing infrastructure and asset management recommendations and ideas to you, incorporating all of this data into our own work. So that's why it was really key for us to be working, that first really in-depth part of the project being working with CBRD staff and our technical partners, the ministries, our member municipalities, et cetera, so we can all start building that lens into our work. And then the second piece would be, what is our role as local government in supporting our rural community in developing their own resilience? And I think that's the piece that will emerge over time. I have to say that based on the folks who attended last Tuesday evening, we did a little poll, and one of the questions was, who do you think is responsible for action? And I was really pleased to see that the majority of participants identified a whole range of players. So from insurance industries, provincial government, local government themselves, various industries. So I think probably, what's happening around our province and what happened last month in our province has really given a number of those folks, maybe some of the ostriches, some ability to see that we can do our best to model, to plan, but the key really is having information so that we can make those informed decisions. So in terms of next steps, I'm really excited for Tamsin and the team to be able to come to you in the new year, talk to you in detail about the work and field all of your really detailed questions. But I can say that there's certainly to be more, and that's why we're going to seek some more funding to do a phase 3.
Thank you. And I had a couple of questions myself, Alana. So first of all, I was really heartened to see Tamsin, our consultant, on some of the documentaries on the flooding in the Fraser Valley. So just knowing that we had such a high caliber of consultant working on this, who's got such deep knowledge and understanding, was really heartening to see, and really unfortunate that she was basically saying she had warned those governments so many times to really invest in many of the infrastructure updates, and that didn't go in the direction, obviously, that it should have. My question is a little bit alluding to what Director Arbor just mentioned with the RGS. And for me, I saw the results of the coastal flood mapping, and I see our RGS, our growth nodes, and I personally see a conflict there. But I'm wondering if staff can maybe describe how the flood mapping may influence the RGS, the work that's being done, and maybe at a sort of a higher level, what are staff thinking in terms of the two, kind of managing the two sets?
Through Madam Chair to the directors, I think I would back up a little bit and just talk about when you have this information, when you're thinking about growth management broadly, so both our settlement nodes, but also our rural areas, and then for our member municipalities. So this is a data set, this is a lens that we'll have to put on recommendations and you on decision making around where new development happens. But the other really important piece about our settlement nodes, as you well know, these are areas that were defined largely because of the existence of existing populations. And so we have residents there, we have infrastructure in those areas, and this data is going to help us think about how we help support those residents and how we make decisions about the infrastructure that is in those areas. So I think, for a long time, we've been coming to you to reference both our regional growth strategy policies and the official community plan policies, which speak to no further new development in hazard areas, and that holds true. So this, perhaps for some that thought that the risk was being overstated in the past, perhaps this will help affirm that idea that we were on the right path by really not putting more things in the way of the water and the future water. Thank you.
And Madam Chair, could I just ask Alana to align, it was mentioned about the RGS review and what is currently proposed and what is the timeline for such?
Thanks for that, Russell. So you might remember at strategic planning, you talked a little bit about wanting to keep the momentum on the RGS service and bylaw with this board. You've done so much to invest in it and to use it and to make it into a much different service than it was 5, 6, 7 years ago. And what we committed to, what you asked us to do, was come forward with a bit of a scoping exercise for you in the new year. So you could identify the kinds of areas that you would like staff to focus to bring our focus to, and then also give you an indication of what kind of engagement we might undertake with the public. So to Russell's point, that's what we'll be bringing to you in the first quarter, that scoping, and you can discuss, and then you can make decisions about what the timing could look like. And you'll remember, of course, that the first step in that decision is the board stating whether or not to initiate our 5-year review. You certainly don't have to.
Great, thank you. And just one comment, you talked about adaptation sequencing. And I'm wondering if you could maybe just elaborate what that, what are some of the sequences? I mean, you don't have to say exactly which way we'll go, but what are those steps that happen in sequencing?
Through Madam Chair, one of the pieces that I've really learned through working with Ebwater is that it's really important to take time to get this right, and really to make those informed decision about what the right approach is, but also the temporal aspect, the importance of timing. So, certainly in other parts of the province right now, they're grappling with that, maybe, in a bit of a hindsight kind of lens. But in our case, some of the risks won't really present themselves for 20, 30, 40 years. Other areas we know more concerted effort is required now. So that's what Tamsin, I think, will be able to speak to a little bit about. And really the core principle that we're trying to think about there is what do we do and when? In order to make, not to raise fear among people, not to strap our community with very high debt load or anything like that.
Thank you. Any other comments from the directors? No. Well, thanks for that report, Alana. On receipt, is anyone opposed? And that's carried. I'm keeping everyone on their toes, right? We have an item on new business, 5040 Central Road, the Beulah Creek Affordable Housing for Hornby Island. Correspondence from Director Arbor for receipt. Okay. I think that was a move, and I can second. And over to Director Arbor. Do you want to speak to that? Oh, sorry.
Thank you. So this is an item, I guess I'm sure the directors and stuff have read the letter, but this is the Beulah Creek housing project on Hornby Island, which was incepted, I want to say 2008, 2009. So it's been a number of years, and then resulting in acquisition of property through basically amenity zoning. And so we received this letter from BC Housing. There's been, for the past year, definitely a sentiment that this project, like many projects, are having difficulty with the construction markets and all those other things. So the letter doesn't give any specifics. I did get a little bit more information talking to a couple of people on the island. And so for background, the BC Housing and the province attributed a grant of $2.6 million to the project in 2018. It's about, at the time, it was deemed to be an $8 or $10 million project for 26 units, which is massive for Hornby. And I guess BC Housing is reaching out to us looking for support, and that is not defined. So I guess my requested action is to send staff to try to have a meeting with the author of the letter is actually Malcolm McNaughton, and he's kind of in charge of the show on Vancouver Island in regards to BC Housing. So first, I would want to find out what it is that they would like to talk about around this. If it is money, because I doubt that it'd be other things than money, maybe, but there's a few things I would leave staff with, is that maybe it might be good to pass on to BC Housing. It hasn't hit our table yet, but there is an emerging document around looking at a housing feasibility for the islands, which I guess we'll consider at budget time. So we're not advanced on that, but they might actually help inform that, is what I'm trying to say. If they see any kind of role for us to play in that. I also know HiSeek is working on MRDT and are looking at the potential housing component. And then the other one is, I noticed, the water and septic are mentioned in the letter. So community works obviously was the other thing that was popping to mind. If there was a short-term need or whatever, I would definitely be supportive to explore that. So I would say, you know, for staff, you're kind of going in and trying to figure out if there's a role for local government. You already probably know that. I believe that whatever gets us gets this project done, if they have trouble, I am very supportive of. Try to get that to the finish line. There won't be other opportunities in the foreseeable future, I think, with BC Housing on Hornby. And my greatest fear and the fear of the community, of course, is that those setbacks lead to a major setback on the project. And if we have a role to play, so be it. At the same meeting, if you feel like it, it's not in my letter, you can also inquire about Denman Island. BC Housing has aligned with them. All these things would probably inform, actually just open that dialogue around the future for the islands in that partnership. So hopefully that gives enough background, and the directors and staff are enthusiastic about pursuing a meeting like that.
Thank you for that. Any other questions on Director Arbor's correspondence and Director Creed?
No, just a comment. I think I said it in the email, is that McNaughton there, I mean, you almost need a translator to understand what his cryptic language is so bureaucrat needs, you know. For me, I went, you know, what's he really saying here? So.
Okay, thanks for that comment. Seeing no other lights on, I'm gonna call the question on receipt. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried, and we have a requested action. Moved and seconded. And any comments on the requested action that our staff meet with BC Housing? Okay, hearing and seeing none. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried unanimously. We have already approved the addendum. And so our next item is an in-camera motion under 91E and 91F of the local government, of the community charter. Moved and seconded. Anyone opposed? And that is carried, and we'll move in camera.